Good.
Good morning. Morning, everyone. Good morning to you, Chief Constable, and your senior team. To those watching online and present with us, you're all very welcome to this April accountability meeting in public, and my first as the newly elected chair of the Policing Board. Can I begin by thanking board members for electing me today? I am of the firm belief that the board remains an exemplar for policing oversight and is an essential part of our policing architecture here in Northern Ireland. I also know how committed and vested all board members are to discharging their accountability duties rigorously and in working to make sure policing delivers the best possible service. And I look forward to working with Mukesh, who has been elected as my vice chair. This is a milestone year for us all as we mark 25 years of the new policing arrangements. There is still much work to be done, and there are areas where we need to reflect, to renew, and to refresh on the approach going forward. And this week, with the reckless attempt to attack Lurgan Police Station, we are very much reminded that 25 years on, we are not living in the normal, peaceful society envisaged, with the ongoing threat that policing and its officers and staff continues to operate under. As a board, we welcome the widespread condemnation of those behind this incident and the support voiced for policing. That continued civic support is needed going forward as we continue our work to ensure that the PSNI is effective, efficient, and representative of the community it serves. We will remain focused on investment in policing as it remains central to the safety and security of our community. And at this point, Trevor, can I record the board's condemnation of threats made to you as a public representative as well? Chief Constable, we agreed a collective focus should be given to ending violence against women and girls at today's meeting and in the period ahead. As a board, we are all agreed on the need to ensure policing is properly resourced to respond to increasing levels of violence against women and girls. Since our last meeting, 2 further women have been brutally murdered, Ellie Flanagan and Amy Doherty. We send our sympathies to their family and friends. Misogynistic and predatory behaviours, wherever they manifest, must be challenged and dealt with, and today we specifically want to pick up on recent reports, including the Ombudsman's report on abusive position for sexual purpose by police officers, which has caused significant concern, and also Operation Roric, which came out of the Angelini report into the Metropolitan Police. Your report today also covers findings from the Langdale review, which you commissioned last year, and provides areas for action within the PSNI as an organisation and in external delivery of the service. Firstly, as a board, we welcome your categoric acceptance that there is an issue with misogyny, and your commissioning of the Langdale review is proof of that. The first step in solving any problem is accepting that there is a problem to solve. As Baroness Casey said in her 2023 review of the Metropolitan Police, tackling this requires radical leadership, accountability, and systemic change. Those who came forward to engage with the Langdale review, and indeed your own inclusion surveys, need assured that you and your team are providing clear leadership on this issue and calling this out for what it is. There is no room in PSNI for misogyny or any other inappropriate or predatory behaviours. For our part, we have strengthened the PSNI Code of Ethics in these areas so that there is absolutely no ambiguity. We have just received the Langdale report, so we will discuss that with you today and over the coming weeks, and look forward to direct engagement with the author at a future board meeting. It is important that we use the forthcoming board meetings to examine the findings of the reports so that the wider public are assured on the steps being taken. And it is also important to the officers and staff who do their job professionally, ethically, and with integrity to know that they can confidently challenge those that don't. Last week, at the Justice Recognition Awards, acts of bravery, acts of selflessness, and acts of commitment and professionalism were celebrated. Chief Constable, today I would also like to record appreciation and recognition to the officers and staff involved in the Natalie McNally murder investigation and those who worked to secure justice for her and her family. The investigation was a team PSNI effort in terms of all the work streams required across the organisation in progressing the investigation. I should be grateful if you would pass on our thanks to all the officers and staff involved, and also to all those who provided support to Natalie's family over the course of the last 3 years. Chief Constable, over to you for your opening comments, and then we will move to questions.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members and everyone in the room and watching online. Before I start, I want to congratulate you and the new Vice Chair and welcome you to your new respective roles. I look forward to continuing our work together in the coming years. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Mukesh for his support as Chair over the past 2 years. He's chaired this board with his customary energy, skill, openness and sensitivity. I'm personally extremely grateful for all his support during my time as Chief Constable and his support to the senior team, particularly in his lobbying for the PSNI to get the political and financial support it needs. And he was supported in those endeavours by you as the previous Deputy Chair, which we are all grateful for. I also want to make note of the incredible visibility and support you've both given in your previous roles to our immense workforce. I want to begin my remarks by joining our politicians and you, Chair, and the extraordinary number of everyday people and leaders in society in condemning the actions of the cowards who terrorised and endangered the life of a delivery driver and my officers and staff, and indeed the public. This worker was held at gunpoint, threatened and forced to drive a crude explosive device through a residential area to Lurgan PSNI station. Over 100 homes were evacuated and significant disruption was caused to local people and businesses. I'm grateful for the patience, understanding and support of everyone in the area while we conducted what was a major public safety operation. Detectives from our terrorist investigation unit have begun an investigation, and while inquiry is at an early stage, there is little doubt that distant Republicans were responsible. This is likely to have been a sad attempt to appear relevant ahead of planned distant Republican parades over Easter. The only thing these people are interested in is themselves and their own egos. They are irrelevant to today's communities in Northern Ireland. I want to pay particular tribute to the courageous delivery driver who alerted officers to the threat and asked that people consider the contrast between the cowards that perpetrated this and that delivery driver and all those countless people in our society who repeatedly stand up against such unsupported acts of terrorism or acts of intimidation. There is no place in a democratic society for such criminals, and I appeal to anyone with any information whatsoever to come forward and tell us what they know, tell us who was involved before these idiots cause some harm. They do not deserve anyone's protection or support. It's been some time since the Chief Constable has come before this board in the aftermath of a distant Republican attack towards our officers. These events are a time reminder that the threat level in Northern Ireland remains at substantial, meaning at any time an attack is likely. PSNI officers and staff are still the primary target of that threat. On this day, the 2nd of April of 2011, Constable Ronan Kerr was murdered by a car bomb planted outside his home. Mine, and I'm sure all of our collective thoughts as a senior team and a board, are with his remarkable family. He was an incredible young man. With this in mind, I want to personally thank each and every member of this organisation for actually stepping up to make a positive difference and for protecting all of our communities. Your courage in doing the job you do, your humility in simply wanting to help people, and your professionalism in how you deliver policing services stands out above all other policing that I have seen. This attempted attack was as futile as it was cruel. These ever decreasing distant gangs have no support and nothing to offer. Society simply does not want them. The sooner they realise that, the better, and things will be much better for everyone. I ask all such groups to stop such pointless attacks. You are changing nothing. Think of your children, indeed their future children, and our collective next generation. We all need the future to be peaceful and for Northern Ireland to be a place where we respect our neighbours and have a society that is fair and safe for everyone. I'm incredibly grateful to my PSNI officers and staff and all our partners who responded to this incident with such professionalism. I share their frustration that they should be dealing with issues that are of actual concern to the local community. Drugs, violence against women and girls, which we will discuss, threats to vulnerable people. Instead, they had to respond to this reckless act. I want to turn now to the issue of violence against women and girls and the role of police in challenging and ultimately ending it. First and foremost, my thoughts are with the family of Amy Doherty, who was brutally murdered only last week. She leaves behind 2 young children, and all of our thoughts are with them. Amy's murder came in the same week as the conviction of the killer of Natalie McNally. I want to pay tribute to Natalie's family for the incredible fortitude, strength and humility that they have shown throughout the investigation and indeed the trial. I also want to acknowledge the pain and the ongoing fight for justice of the Chloe Mitchell family. And again, my sincere condolences to the family of Ellie Flanagan. These are all human tragedies, real people with exciting futures stolen from them. These are not statistics. I also want to put on record my significant and sincere thanks to all of the officers who've dealt with these incredibly challenging investigations. It was heartwarming to see the family of Natalie's response to the prosecution team and the investigating officers because of how they dealt with that very difficult case. Amy's murder brings to 30 the number of women who've been murdered by men here in the past 5 years. For a country the size of Northern Ireland, that is shocking. And I want to reiterate the determination of everyone in the PSNI to do everything in our power to address this profound societal issue. I, of course, recall the awful circumstances when I arrived of the Katie Simpson murder. All of these women, all of these deaths has to be an awakening for each of us. I'm determined that it will be within the PSNI. This is about collective leadership. We will do everything we can when it comes to tackling violence against women and girls. Last April, I commissioned an independent review led by Rachel Langdale KC, examining our operational response to violence against women and girls and the internal culture that underpins that response. I'm grateful to Rachel and her colleagues for their diligent work and the learning the report provides. I have accepted the findings and recommendations in full, and as a service, we will ensure that clear and measurable action is taken to address them. The executive summary and recommendations of the Langdale report have been shared with the board and have been published on our website. I have repeatedly, since arriving here, expressed concerns about our capacity to properly address violence against women and girls. I've also expressed concerns as regards our approach and internal mechanisms for dealing with both violence against women and girls and misogyny. When arriving, I was disturbed by the numbers of domestic homicides in Northern Ireland. And when reaching into the behaviours of society in general towards women and girls, and into a small number of cases of inappropriate behaviour within the PSNI, I became aware of the worrying levels of wider misogyny, having met a number of victims. I asked those same victims each to speak to Rachel Langdale and her team on the understanding of confidentiality. The full report is not being formally published. However, it is being shared in full with the board and those stakeholders who assisted the review to share the learning and to help us in maximising our efforts to improve how these issues are dealt with. We will also share updates of our progress with those stakeholders and, of course, with the board. The recommendations will be embedded within our revised Year 4 Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan and will be overseen by Assistant Chief Constable Davy Beck through the Violence Against Women and Girls Working Group. I was delighted that Rachel emphasises from the outset the enormous amount of collective goodwill from the third sector organisations towards the police and a willingness to work together. This is notable in respect of the efforts of the PSNI. I must particularly praise our Public Protection Branch, and the report underpins our willingness to address all of these difficult issues. I commissioned this report to ensure we strengthen how we deal with domestic violence, violence against women and girls, and misogyny. I wanted an independent look at our culture, our systems and processes, and for the report to identify meaningful and sustainable mechanisms for improvement. Rachel makes clear that she encountered evidence of misogyny in this police service. Let me repeat here the message I have repeatedly shared and again shared with the entire organisation in a video last week. There is no place in this organisation for any misogyny, sexism, or hateful behaviour in any form towards any colleagues from anyone. It is unacceptable and it will not be tolerated. I have repeatedly and widely encouraged everyone to report any negative experiences and to refuse to accept the unacceptable. Any cases will be dealt with robustly. Indeed, last year in 2025 and so far this year, I've personally overseen 14 special case hearings considering alleged misconduct of officers. Many of these involved elements of misogyny, and in each case, the officer involved was dismissed without notice by me. Where standards fall short, we will act in the most robust fashion. Those who act in this way can expect to lose their jobs as a minimum. We will actively look towards a criminal prosecution for such actions. Alongside the issue of misogyny, my accountability report this month focuses significantly on the findings of the recent Police Ombudsman report examining abuse of position for sexual purposes. Such abuse of position and authority is wholly unacceptable and perhaps the most serious and egregious breach of trust imaginable. It will not be tolerated. I was pleased the Ombudsman reflected on the increase of reports from the PSNI and the report's observation that this reflects a willingness at the most senior level to root out this behaviour, which is so damaging to the organisation. I also welcome the support of the Ombudsman in delivering the systemic and cultural change necessary to challenge and eradicate any such behaviour. The Ombudsman rightfully identifies serious individual misconduct, but also recognises the work undertaken to strengthen our standards, vetting and misconduct procedures, and to ensure that learning from past failures is acted upon. I am determined that we don't shy away from seeking to understand the extent of sexism and misogyny in the PSNI and indeed in society. We must have a workforce where inappropriate conduct is not accepted, where people feel able to speak up and their concerns will be taken seriously. We've reinforced our policy and guidance in relation to abuse of position for sexual purposes and are improving our ability to prevent, identify and respond to this behaviour. We've also engaged with this board to support the ongoing work to update our code of ethics. I am very grateful for the findings of the Ombudsman's report and the learning it provides. We will continue to work closely with the Ombudsman to ensure robust prevention, early identification and decisive action. It is, however, crucial that we all remember that the overwhelming majority of our officers and staff are a credit to us all. These sickening cases that the Ombudsman report itself sets out as being relatively small, but even one case is a case too many. Violence against women and girls is not just a policing issue, it's a societal, a community issue. And as a police service, we know a whole societal approach is required to drive down the appalling levels of violence in Northern Ireland. Our officers and staff are continuing to work with partners to support innovative projects designed to change attitudes to violence against women and girls and educate young people, particularly young boys and young men. These projects include the excellent Fair Game scheme with the Irish Football Association and the Federation of Women's Aid, and our award-winning How to Change campaign. The second phase of this will be launching in May. This challenges men and boys' attitudes and behaviours to women and girls. It encourages active bystander intervention against misogyny. I also want to highlight another innovative project which received some welcome publicity this week. Many of you will have seen this coverage of the Kids Court scheme run by officers in Derry City and Strabane. Drivers detected speeding outside a local school were given the option of facing a panel of students or accepting penalty points. The goal of this project is to change driver behaviour and reinforce road safety messaging for children. 20 people have died on Northern Ireland's roads so far this year. We've got to try everything we can to get the message through to drivers. All of this innovation and effort happens against the backdrop of a challenging financial environment. Of all the challenges facing policing, our financial position and our numbers is top of the list. Without people, we cannot do the policing. I told the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee last week that despite recent welcome indications of support for policing, we remain structurally underfunded in a precarious financial position. In-year funding helped us balance the books this year, but we still do not have an agreed budget for next year, and we will be relying on in-year funding once again. This is no way to run an organisation of this size with the range of societal priorities that we must deliver to keep people safe. During that session, I also highlighted the challenges of legacy. I'm aware that the Northern Ireland Office is seeking significant funding from the Treasury for the new Legacy Commission, and yet no consideration is given to helping the PSNI supply the majority of material that will be required by the Commission if it is to succeed. Indeed, worse than even that, the Troubles Bill requires the PSNI to undertake various assessments of every document that we will provide to it. We neither have the people nor the time to do this. The legacy material held by the PSNI should be provided in an unfettered manner to the Commission. It should be for the Commission to suitably classify documents and determine any prejudice that might exist, not for the PSNI. Surely for us to do any such role would infringe on the independence of the investigation and the principles of ECHR. Further to these challenges, many legacy civil cases are culminating in the courts. The PSNI has no funding to address these cases that we inherited from policing during the Troubles era. The money to fund such cases comes from a budget that should be paying for neighbourhood officers, desperately needed to keep communities safe from paramilitaries, and for providing trained detectives to tackle violence against women and girls and the exploitation of children online. The turning of a blind eye to the legacy pressures unfairly and unreasonably placed on the PSNI, whilst hundreds of millions is being sought from the Treasury for the Legacy Commission, will likely prove to be a point of failure for legacy. Legacy has to be addressed. It requires a wider approach than simply funding the Commission. We project funding pressures of £65 million next year, rising to £118 million by 28-29. The indicative capital allocation for next year is £52 million, significantly below our assessed requirement of over £70 million. These figures represent a stark picture of the financial challenges facing the organisation. It prevents us from modernising and protecting our estate. I will continue to lobby hard to ensure we have the resources we need and make clear to political leaders and the public the serious consequences of failing to do so. PSNI officers and staff continue to deliver for victims, protect communities and tackle harm across Northern Ireland. In the past month, we've seen some fantastic police work, including the disruption of organised crime groups involved in the supply of drugs, the seizure of firearms and criminal assets linked to paramilitaries, and the arrest and prosecution of individuals involved in serious violence. Our officers have intervened daily to save lives, responding to individuals in crisis and providing emergency care at critical incidents. Policing is about so much more than just finding and arresting people who break the law. Recently, I received a letter from a very busy social worker who spent Christmas Eve in one of our stations with a mother with two small children after a domestic violence incident. It's a remarkable and moving letter and talks about the patience, care, empathy and understanding shown towards the victim, as well as the energy and emotional resource a whole team of officers put into caring for two traumatised children. The social worker writes, "The kindness from officers whose compassion shone through, and the time and energy which officers later put into retrieving, assembling and delivering the children's Christmas presents to their temporary home. This is a kindness which will stay with those children forever." That is the real PSNI, and one which is never reflected in newspaper headlines or statistics. We are always striving to communicate that truth to more and more people. Those who attacked Lurgan Police Station should reflect on those stations being a place of safety for vulnerable people. Linked to that, Chair, you will have noticed the BBC starting to trail a new police series, Peelers, the PSNI for Real, which will be broadcast next month. As part of our plan to build public understanding of policing and to challenge some of the relentlessly negative coverage of policing from some traditional quarters, we've been working closely with Stephen Nolan and a documentary team for the past 18 months to produce a fly on the wall programme about policing. I've seen some early cuts of the programme, and it really is excellent television. It is an uncompromising look at the challenges facing frontline officers on a daily basis. It shows the reality of this job, the teamwork, the complexities. It shows the violence and abuse officers face, as well as the life-changing, high-pressure decisions they have to make every day. With this project, we've come as close as we can to taking the whole country on a ride along. I'm enormously grateful to the officers who volunteered to be the face of the PSNI for this programme. I don't underestimate the difficulty of such a decision in Northern Ireland, and they really have done us all proud. With a recruitment campaign due to launch in the autumn, alongside the events to mark our 25th anniversary, this series is a real opportunity to strengthen our messaging around the positive impact that policing can have within our local communities. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm now happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for those opening remarks. At the start of the questions, we're going to focus very much on the PSNI response to violence against women and girls and misogyny within the service. But just before we do that, I think it's always useful to bring us back down to earth in terms of the ability of the PSNI to respond to these issues that are facing civic society. And of course, that revolves around adequate funding being provided. And I noticed in your remarks and welcome in your remarks reference to the failure of the Secretary of State to provide funding for legacy. And certainly the board has written to the Secretary of State and received a very disappointing reply in that regard. And it really is time for the Westminster government to step up and provide the funding to the police service on this issue, not just in terms of the important impact that that will have in relation to the general budget for policing, but also in terms of the reputational damage that is caused to the police service through the legacy issues, particularly when we wish to increase and improve the representativeness of the service. So I'm going to move to questions, and the first half of the questions will be on violence against women and girls, and then we'll move to questions on general policing issues. And our first question is from Linda Dillon with regard to training for supervisors. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose that what I really want to happen from today and what we decided as a board last month is that this would be focused on violence against women and girls, and that's what we want all of you to take away from here today. And the questions we ask, we want to turn into actions. So just to say that I do want to say that my thoughts are with family of both Amy and Ellie and of all of the other 30 women who've died since 2020. And I notice in your accountability report, Chief Constable, you have said in relation to the supervision and early identification that there has been a strengthening of the supervisory capability and set out in clear indicators concerning behaviour, including inappropriate personal communication, so on. But it specifically talks about supervisors are supported to intervene early and to escalate concerns appropriately. So I want to understand that. But I also want to understand what specific training there is rather than just being given, I suppose, notifications or what has been called here, directives. So I want to understand what is the exact training, because I think that you've mentioned capacity and resources. This needs to be a priority. There is nowhere else across the north that 30 people have been murdered in the last 6 years. So we need to have this as a priority. We cannot any longer tolerate it being something that's on the agenda but is not being prioritised. We all need to give leadership, but we need to ensure that it is a priority. So structured guidance is the exact wording. So I want to understand what is the exact training. Structured guidance doesn't sound like training. What is the exact training to identify those predatory behaviours within PSNI? because you talked about the small number of people who have predatory behaviours, but my concern is also around the large number who stay silent, because that is what allows the predatory behaviours to continue, those who don't speak up.
So if I may, just to say a couple of things as an observation before I seek to respond to the question. And I recognised, and I'm grateful that the chair recognised, the investigation team into the murder of Natalie McNally. We have all of the cases that we've spoken about, there have been prosecutions of those responsible. I think the policing focus needs to be on ensuring that orders, harassment orders, stalking orders, are very much properly prioritised with regards to perpetrator activity. The actual conduct of the men who committed these murders goes way back before the police are involved. It does. That's a reality of this. This is a societal issue and probably goes back more into, with a number of them, and I know a lot of us will be reading a lot about this. And I spoke to Jess Phillips only yesterday, who has the government lead on this. A lot of it goes back to societal care issues. What I can provide you with absolute reassurance is that we will be doing everything we possibly can with what we've got to deal with these issues. Around the training, and I don't think this is, I'll bring Claire in, it's only right that I do that, but this starts at the very beginning with student officers. And student officers who come in have an incredible and complex training of 26 weeks, but the training includes lessons on understanding domestic abuse, the definitions, the legislation, barriers from victims to leaving relationships. It deals with non-fatal strangulation, stalking, including harassment. They get instruction on trauma-informed approaches and the cycle of abuse that we see all too often. And of course, often previously unrecognised, the need to understand the impacts on children and safeguarding of children, and includes inputs from advocacy groups such as Women's Aid. One of the things, and I've spoken to the chair about this very recently, that we really need to make sure that we're doing around our internal behaviours, because I think your question is two-tiered, but also our recognition of what's happening in society when we're called to issues, is that frontline supervision role, the sergeant's role for police officers. So we have a fundamentals of management course. This builds on the team PSNI events, which I know a number of members of this board have been to, which of themselves raise issues with regards to the organisational response to violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, and standards in the organisation and behaviours. I am attending all of those courses. It is my aim to speak to all frontline supervisors over the next 2 years, setting out my standards of what I expect and what officers and staff should be doing to ensure the very best of behaviours and the zero tolerance of unacceptable behaviours. We've also introduced a new violence against women and girls online training module that was launched in August of last year. 75% of the organisation have completed that. And we've also introduced across all the different sections of the organisation active bystander training that's been delivered across the PSNI. I repeatedly, Linda, do blogs and mention standards and highlight inappropriate behaviours. I only last week did a blog to the entire organisation, and that comes on the back of a presentation that I did at an event at International Women's Day, and also for those members of the board who were here at the launch of our renewed and revised Code of Ethics. literally appealing for people to come forward who've seen or witnessed these unacceptable behaviours. You'll know we did our cultural audit last year where we specifically asked questions about this issue and issues wider than misogyny, but issues of unacceptable behaviours. So we are doing a plethora of things to make sure that our staff understand the importance of this, and of all organisations in policing, we want to be the very best at this. And one thing that I think is important, and this may cut across some other questions, but I want to mention it, is actions speak louder than words. So there is a question I expected to receive about what we're doing around dealing with people who behave in an unacceptable way. So since 2020, there have been a number of special case hearings. If I can just describe those, they are where I, as the Chief Constable, would chair a hearing because of the seriousness of any misconduct. Okay. I mentioned some of this at the last meeting, but this is a bit more detail. And then I'm going to hand over to Claire around the courses that we're doing. In 2020, there was one special case hearing, which resulted in a dismissal for 4 acts of online activity. Okay. In 2021, there were 3 special case hearings, resulting in 3 dismissals for fraud, abuse of power for sexual purposes, and for child abuse. In 2022, there were 12 special case hearings, resulting in 10 dismissals. They included drugs offences, but also looking at illicit material involving children online, sexual offences, fraud, animal cruelty, and again, abuse of position for sexual purposes. In 2023, 6 special case hearings, resulting in 6 dismissals. 1 of those were for sexual related matter. And in 2024, we had 11 special case hearings, resulting in 9 dismissals, 1 of which involved misconduct in a public office with an officer who engaged in a inappropriate sexual relationship with a member of the public. And then last year, 11 special case hearings, all resulted in dismissal. 6 of those involved misogyny, 1 involving a conviction for domestic abuse, and one involving a conviction for 2 counts of sexual assault. And then this year, we've had 3 special case hearings, all dismissed without notice. 1 related to domestic abuse on a colleague, and 1 a conviction for gross indecency with or towards a child. So we will dismiss those responsible for committing these heinous, unimaginable transgressions. We should be held and are held to the highest standard. And I want to absolutely reassure you that with everything everyone in this senior team has got, we are making sure that we are dealing with this issue in the most robust way. That's why I brought Rachel in. And even when I brought Rachel in, I should say this, and I mentioned it in my own remarks, I've met a number of female officers who are concerned about the response that they received over previous years. They've all met Rachel. This has been in the offering, this report, really, for the last 2 years, and it will shape the next 3 to 5 years of how we deal with these issues. And we'll be getting Rachel back, by the way. I know she's going to come and address the board in July, but she'll be coming back over the next 2 years, and certainly in 2 years' time to do a report on how we've responded to this. So there is zero tolerance of these issues. Let me bring Claire in on.
Chief Constable, just before we bring Claire in, we have a supplementary, and then Claire could maybe come in at that point.
Sorry, Chair.
Patrick, go ahead.
Just before, and Patrick can add a supplementary to this because it's probably similar. I just want to get in before Claire come in, just specifically on the training of supervisors and others in the PSNI to recognise the predatory behaviour. So, and I want a specific answer around what training's happening, or is it is intended that will happen to recognise those and again, that goes back to recognising them at the earliest possible. So where somebody is a probationary officer and can actually be got rid of without having to go through the special case.
And
So-
Patrick.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable, for the response so far. Firstly, I welcome your decision in the first place to commission Rachel Langdale KC to produce this report to benchmark PSNI against other services, and also welcome the fact that you've fully accepted the recommendations. And just really a little bit further on Linda's question, one of the clear recommendations is to deliver face-to-face comprehensive violence against women and girls training for not only local police teams, but call handlers, etc. And I think I'd just like to get a feel for, maybe from yourself or from Claire, the concrete plan that's going to deliver this training, because what we've touched on training a number of times in the past, and we know that there are pressures within, the entire resource base that the PSNI has. But this is such an important area that I don't think we feel we can wait sort of 3-4 years for everybody to be trained. And I'd like to get a feel for just how quickly the training will be designed and delivered, so that you can come back at some point very soon and say, we have gone through the entire organisation. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
No, and please don't misunderstand my remarks. I want to see every supervisor. That's going to take me a little bit of time. But that's about more than this topic. There's a number of issues that I want to speak to those supervisors about, almost around the pledge of expectation that they can have from me and I can have from them. But it feeds into these fundamental issues. Let me bring Claire in on the training, and also Davey will be overseeing this, which will come through Performance Committee, as the VORG action plan does, to make sure that each of the recommendations is progressing, many of which are underway, which I'm sure we'll speak about during this session as well. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. I could probably cover quite a few different areas. I'll try and focus in a little bit more on the specifics. So, as the Chief has outlined and others, we have had good commitment to the VOG training that was launched in August 2025, but I think as members have recognised, that needs to be upweighted, uplifted and enhanced further. And I know that is something that's been developed and looked at. In relation to line managers and supervisors, they play a critical role in empowering and supporting all of our staff and officers in doing their job and in identifying, joining up behaviours or actions, whether that's internally or in the work that they're doing with the public. We are committed to investing in our line manager and leadership training programmes. You'll know that over 80% of our training at the minute is to deliver tactical and operational training, so the skills that our officers need to keep them safe and do their job. We recognise that because of the change and the focus, we need to change the curriculum that we're offering, and we have the plan to uplift what I'm calling the transversal skills that are relevant to everybody in the organisation and in how they're discharging their responsibilities, so that we're investing more heavily in those transversal skills across all grades and ranks. We've two specific line manager or supervisor programmes. The first is the Fundamentals of Management, which is a 2-day programme. The Chief actually opens those workshops recently to set out the clear responsibilities and expectations and to support those people stepping into those first line management roles. That programme has been in operation since January 2023, and so far around 690 staff and officers in first line management positions have been through that Fundamentals of Management training programme. We also have a core leadership programme, and it has a specific module about building psychological safety. So to respond to some of the questions that Linda has asked, again, that's been in place for just over 2 years, and we want to build the capacity there. So around 190 managers or leaders across the organisation have attended that core leadership programme. It's a 3-day programme and also has some supplementary online modules. So we've made a start. We are committed to building on that, and honing in on the areas that are critical for our staff and officers, both to create a workplace environment that is thriving and also to equip them better with the skills to do their job. I'll maybe hand to Bobby. I think he wants to maybe comment on PSD's involvement in some of those training programs and specifically around the predatory behaviour questions.
Yeah, so Linda, and to go to the heart of your question, so there is a PSD prevention and engagement team, and they attend both those leadership courses specifically to highlight the key corruption risks as we see them. And the single biggest one for us is around abusive possession for sexual purpose. So in terms of what that looks like practically, they are looking through that engagement with the supervisors to enhance their understanding of the professional boundaries, the importance of them and the associated risks that come from those being blurred, how predatory behaviour can begin with legitimate contact and can escalate via messaging or social media. They also detail why abusive possession for sexual purposes is a real safeguarding issue and a serious form of corruption. And that includes building the practical capability within those supervisors to recognise the early warning signs, as you mentioned, give them detail on how to escalate concerns promptly, including using some of the confidential reporting routes, giving them information on how they can protect victims and how they can prevent harm, and also reminding all officers and staff of the mechanisms that can be used in order to report other elements of misconduct. What I would say, and I think it was touched on by Brendan as well, is, I mean, obviously working with the board, we have specifically and explicitly sought to address this issue through the new Code of Ethics. So we're obviously waiting for a legislative change in order to actually bring that into effect. We imagine that that'll happen towards the end of the summer, but we're already preparing for a full internal engagement and communication plan that will also be supported by a mandatory or compulsory e-learning package. And again, there will be a specific element within that. Members will remember that it's one of the key changes that we've made under Article 7.6 in the section on integrity explicitly states that police officers shall not establish or continue a sexual or improper relationship with any victim, witness, suspect, detained person or defendant arising from their duties, and that where any off-duty contact is of a material or ongoing nature that could reasonably perceive to create a conflict of interest, it must be reported. So that is going to be a specific focus, not only of the internal communications and engagement, but the training that will be mandatory and compulsory for every single officer, because you're right to highlight the role of supervisors, but I think your question also recognises that actually standards are everybody's responsibility. And, you know, sometimes around this table, we've been quite frustrated in the past that we, for example, have to continue operating as at least two officer teams when we go out. But actually, what you can take from that is the reassurance that there is always another police officer watching the actions of their colleague and is therefore perfectly placed to be able to identify and challenge behaviour and potentially report it as well. But of course, to put them in the best position to be able to do that, we need to make sure that they understand and recognise the hallmarks of predatory behaviour. So you're absolutely right to highlight that. We're alive to it, and it's going to be a key focus of that training for us going forward. But to reassure you, the engagement team within PSD are already doing that work, but we want to take that to the next level with the new Code of Ethics.
I think a final supplementary just in this whole area, and it highlights the important role of first line managers in spotting and addressing abusive possession for sexual purpose. And it goes right back to the OPONI Report, which states in a significant number of cases, supervisors have misunderstood or misinterpreted PSNI guidance on inappropriate relationships with members of the public and not identified abusive possession for sexual purpose behaviour as problematic. So it's all very well the senior team at the top table being committed to addressing misogyny and inappropriate behaviour, but actually the vital role is played by those supervisors and first line managers in calling it out on the ground. I think as a board, we're encouraged at the training that is being taken forward, but what we're also concerned about, and it'd be interesting just to get an update, is that the level of temporary promotions into first line manager roles, and that training that we have been talking about is not mandatory for those temporary promoted officers. I mean, I've had officers say to me that when you're temporarily promoted, you actually don't call out behaviours because you're likely to go back into your peer group afterwards. Therefore, you're kind of just treading water. So in November 2025, we were told there were 200 temporary promoted sergeants. I'd be interested as to today, how many temporary promoted sergeants are there? And of them, how many have undertaken the training?
If I could come in first, Chair, just on your first comments about the Ombudsman's report. The Ombudsman's report came on the back of a report last March, which the board will recall came from the Criminal Justice Inspectorate. And that report looked at how cases of abuse of position for sexual purposes were being investigated. There are a number of strategic recommendations and operational recommendations. Predominantly, that report was looking at the Ombudsman's response. There are a couple of things for us that came out of that report. One is the thing that you've alluded to, which is picked up again in the subsequent abuse of position for sexual purposes report from the Ombudsman. So both reports talk about supervisors not understanding or misunderstanding or misinterpreting what is permissible. And we have a particular service instruction, it's 3217, which is about maintaining a professional boundary between police officers and members of the public. In the original report from last March, it required that we renew that and be more specific about those boundaries. We did that very quickly, and that was again picked up when the Ombudsman found some cases, and this is important that I acknowledge this, that we had not referred to the Ombudsman, which involved abuse of power because we felt we had dealt with them internally. So on that point, and I'm going to then transition into your training point and sergeants, we now refer all cases, regardless of our actions and our satisfaction that we've addressed them, all cases to the Ombudsman. And one of the, again, two recommendations for us from the Virginia report from last March that I think it's fair to say led to the Ombudsman's report on abuse of position for sexual purposes was that we reviewed any cases the Ombudsman had found about this awful predatory behaviour that we'd not referred for any lessons learned. We've also done that. So there's a lot of work in the background to make sure that we have in detail dealt with recommendations. The difficulty is making sure that people understand. It's all right writing a policy, but we've got to live and breathe it. You rightfully highlight, and Claire may want to come in on this, that the PSNI operates routinely under a number of temporary promotions, particularly at sergeant. And currently, I got the number for the 31st of March, we had 201 temporary promoted sergeants. And it is not necessary, not mandatory previously, for them to do the fundamentals of management course that Claire described. In fact, previously, we'd not been able to track what temporary sergeants had gone on that course. So two specific changes. We've now got a tracking mechanism to know who goes on that course. All of the newly substantiatedly promoted sergeants have to, and that's recorded. But you rightfully point out, allude to in your question, that temporary sergeants did not have to. Training and education and understanding about these issues is our front line of defence about this. All temporary sergeants will now have to go on that course. That is going to be a further significant uplift in training, which goes to Linda's question at the beginning. But that will also be tracked. And all of that will come under the stewardship of Davy in monitoring the recommendations that we've got from Rachel Langdale. So I hope that goes to answer a couple of those points that you made.
No, I think it answers the question.
Okay.
I'm going to move on with because we've got a lot of questions. And certainly from my perspective, and I'm sure the rest of the board, we welcome the change in policy that the training is mandatory for the temporary promoted sergeants, though I do appreciate the resource implications for that in terms of delivering it. Bobby, you want it to come in quickly?
Yeah, I will be quick. So, and again, just to reassure you, so specifically around this issue of supervisors having conversations and potentially challenging individuals around inappropriate associations or relationships, the board will be aware that we've introduced our new PDR process, which will mandate that line managers are sitting down at least once a year, in all probability, probably more than that. But built into that is also an integrity health check, which it requires a conversation with both the subject and the supervisor to confirm that they're aware of the standards that are expected of them. And it will specifically examine their compliance with the likes of our policy around relationships, as well as other conflicts of interest. So that's going to be hardwired and built in as a process going forward.
Yes, thank you.
I know we're short of time, but just on that, my attendance at those meetings will deal with that PDR chat. It will deal with 3 expectations I've got that I'm not going to go into now about the people that they're responsible for supervising around their careers. It will talk about, and I've already done this, so I've got a set agenda, the standards of behaviour and the monitoring and performance of their staff, which is to a higher standard than other public services. It will deal with specifically violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, race, hate crime, child exploitation, our behaviours and our culture. So I've started that process, and it will lead to, which is being developed now, a pledge between those supervisors and me. It's something of a contract around what we expect. So that, again, I think will be informed significantly by the report that Rachel produced.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on, and I have a question from Nuala McAllister on Operation Roric.
Thank you, Chair. And I have another question for later.
Yes.
In the public sector. Yeah, okay. And before I go to my question, I just think it is important, just as there is obviously quite a lot of work being done internally and with investigations when it comes to police tax and fog. And you're right, Chief, it is once it comes to police, it's already too late in a number of the circumstances that the attitudes start in society much before there's any criminal behaviour. I do think it's important to note that as a member of the policing board and the board in its entirety, we are an accountability and scrutiny body, and so we must scrutinise the work of the PSNI. And I do want to welcome, the proposals from the board for the inclusion in the Code of Ethics, our proposals around a duty of candour, but also specifically around misogynistic behaviour now being included in the Code of Ethics. It is important, not just from myself, but from the board as well, that it was included, and I welcome that the PSNI have got on board with that as well. And I particularly welcome the moving away from the few bad apples attitude that unfortunately we have seen at this board too many times. For myself in particular, when I have been asking questions around violence against women and girls and internal behaviours, which leads me to the Operation Roric. In the accountability report, it highlights that there's 183 recommendations, if I'm correct, and they have all been implemented. When can we be provided with evidence of that they actually have been implemented? And obviously, there will need to be some time for embedding in how we can actually see the changes that they have made. And without getting into the detail of the current investigation that OPONI are undertaking, is it now worth the PSNI going further back than 2012, given that the current case does involve an individual who left the service, I believe, in 2009 or thereabouts?
So I'll bring Bobby in, Nuala, just for clarity, I think, for people who may be watching. So the Ombudsman declared a critical incident into an investigation into a retired member of the police service who left in 2011. And they announced that they had significant concerns about the seriousness of offending that wasn't previously understood. So they made that public recently. I welcome that, I've supported that, and I have invited in a number of forums for anybody with any information to come forward. In fact, I've signposted through an open blog to all the organisation that people who have concerns about coming forward through any of the reporting mechanisms we have to speak to my Chief of Staff, Amanda Ford, around that particular investigation that they're now conducting. Because Roric, Operation Roric, which came out of the reviews that all forces undertook post the murder of Sarah Everard in March 2021, we looked at cases going from 2012 to 2022. Bobby's done a huge amount of work on this, so I'm just going to hand him over to talk to you about some of the specifics and the reassurances around what we've done and what more might need to be done, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Nuala. So I think you'll be aware that I've written to the board with a summary overview in terms of the findings. I'd never thought that would be the end of our discussion on the matter, and I appreciate that even in terms of today's format, it perhaps doesn't lend itself to getting into the level of detail that I think board members will want in terms of reassurance. But I'm more than happy if board members want to collate questions in respect of Operation Roric. What I had envisaged doing was coming and bringing actually the team that were involved in Operation Roric. It was about 7 or 8 public protection specialists who had led on that work for us, to allow them to come and talk about their work and their findings. I mean, you talked about the 183 recommendations. I think they fell broadly into 5 thematic areas for improvement. So absolutely, I'd like to come down and give you more detail in terms of what we consider the key learning to be and how it's been applied already, or if indeed there's further work that needs to be done, to provide you with timescales for when you can expect that to be realised. So happy, Chair, to do that with the board as a whole. In terms of the question specifically about whether there would be merit in going back beyond the 10-year period that we've looked at, I do believe in terms of the 2012 to 2022 and beyond period, I think we will have managed to capture the majority of the organisational learning in respect to that. Although I think your question perhaps goes more to possibly individual safeguarding issues as much as anything else. I mean, obviously, we're working very closely with PONI to understand the totality of what's happening around their investigation into MLA. And again, if there are particular lessons from that, we'll grasp them. The reality is, to go back beyond the 2012 period would involve taking resource effectively away from today's investigations, whether that be in public protection or in fact in professional standards department. And members will have seen a recommendation already from Rachel Langdale. And in fact, if you look at the Sagini report as well, it was alluded to, it also recommended an uplift in PSD resource. So the reality in our resourcing situation at the minute is that we don't have additional resource to put to a further retrospective investigation at this time. So I think perhaps the best thing for us to do is to stay close with PONI in terms of their investigation, to make sure we extract any learning from that. And if any additional capacity did become available to us, it's perhaps something we could review again in the future. But I am reasonably settled in thinking that we have managed to kind of extract the majority of the learning, certainly, that could be gleaned. And certainly going back any further than 2012, you're likely to be examining practices which have long since changed. But it's one that we'll keep under review, I think. But at this moment in time, the reality being that the resource to potentially do that doesn't exist without extracting from contemporary threats and risk.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Les Allamby next. Where's Les?
Yeah,
Les.
thanks, Chair. I want to look at the contemporary workplace culture. I too welcome the commissioning of the Rachel Langdale review, Chief Constable. But in light of its recommendations and the recent findings of PSNI's own inclusion survey, that first 20% of women have experienced inappropriate behaviour in the workplace in the last 12 months, and that second, over 40% of those incidents were classed as misogyny, and with over half of them not being reported as inappropriate behaviour. Can you tell us what practical steps you're taking to tackle this issue, and how will we measure when things have improved?
So, where is Les? I've lost you. Sorry, Les. Sorry, forgive me. So, Les, I think this forum is an example of the practical measures that we're taking, because we're surfacing this very publicly. The very report that Rachel's done and meeting the officers and members of staff that I've asked her to meet, who agreed to meet her, the seriousness with which we take it, the numerous blogs that I have done personally, and these events are also socialised and discussed, and our position made clear at the Team PSNI events. Also, it's interesting. I looked at the OPONI report. This is the report on the abuse of position for sexual purposes, and the OPONI report sets out very clearly that we, the PSNI, have clear policy and guidance, have made a wealth of statements making it clear that this behaviour is unacceptable and it will not be tolerated. But there are still challenging some people coming forward. I will say, in the survey that you've referenced, I was disappointed with the statistics around the number of people who would report inappropriate behaviour. I think our figure was 45%. The figure in England and Wales is half of that. It's less than 25%. We intend, and we've made very clear with our staff associations and our support groups, to go back out to survey in a couple of years to look, and all of this work will contribute to that, to look at improvement curve around people's confidence in coming forward. I think the fact that we're demonstrating more publicly now the outworkings of the special case hearings is also having an impact. And I've already mentioned in this forum the various public sessions that we as a team have raised these issues, which is becoming routine practice, I think is definitely engendering more confidence in the organisation, not just around misogyny being unacceptable, but other behaviours as well. And it is interesting that after the awful murder of Sarah Everard in March 2021, the reporting for sexual predatory behaviour for forces in England and Wales went up by 50%. One thing I do also just want to mention before I bring Claire in is the statement of action that we did in August of 2024, and Bobby did a huge amount of work on this. Again, that is mentioned in the Ombudsman's report, and the Ombudsman says that the PSNI could not be clearer. And part of that statement of intent, officers will not engage in personal relationships with victims, witnesses, or suspects, or other members of the public who come to us for help. 8,139 of our officers and staff signed up to that in August. So we're doing a huge amount, but I recognise we need to keep the pressure on and do more and more, and we need to measure it. We need to measure that these matters are being reported. Interestingly, again, last year, and you'll have seen crime figures come down in Northern Ireland across the piece, not with regards to sexual offences. It's the only area that was up between the 1st of April of 2024 and the 31st of March 2025. The only offences that were up were sexual offences. Now, some of that, and it's referenced again in the Ombudsman's report, may be more confidence in reporting. Whatever the answer, it demonstrates the challenges that we've got. But with regards to the concerns of people not feeling they can come forward and the survey itself, I'll just bring Claire in, and Bobby might want to say something as well.
Thank you very much. So in relation to the actions that were taken on the back of what the survey has told us, we've had detailed meetings with every departmental management team to look at the survey results from their perspective, because each team is different and has shown different traits or factors that we need to understand or explore further. So that's helped us identify some key themes and pinpoint the areas that we need to deeper dive into. We've also got a programme of focus groups that have started in certain branches. Attending those focus groups are staff and officers from those branches across ranks and grades. And that's giving us a much better understanding into the specific experiences that people have had of inappropriate behaviour or discrimination at work, or the culture within the teams that they're working in. And that was going to enable us to have very specific actionable insights by branch and department that can be recorded on our departmental business plans. The Deputy Chief Constable and myself also have put in place a culture implementation group so we can oversee the actions and the work that has taken place, and that brings together senior colleagues from across all the departments within the organisation. We've also held some focus groups specific to looking at the survey results through a gender lens. So we ran a session as part of our International Women's Day conference where we were able to look at the gender specific results from the survey and hear directly from female staff and officers about their ideas for improvement and also their direct experiences. I think you've quoted some of the information, Les, in your question, but you're correct in saying that women have told us in the survey that they are more likely to experience inappropriate behaviour than men, and indeed that's greater for female police officers than it is for female police staff. And we also want to, with them, understand why maybe they are not reporting when they do either experience or witness inappropriate behaviour. And we understand that that may be because they believe no action would be taken, because they are fearful of the impact it might have on their career, or they might be labelled as a troublemaker. And we also know that there are some opportunities working with our colleagues in PSD around, if they do raise any concerns, how that might be dealt with in a way that they, as a victim, might feel is most appropriate to support them. So those are all the issues that we are exploring across branches and departments, and specifically with some groups of females. We're also very grateful to our colleagues in the WPA, the Women's Police Association, who have got a significant interest in this area, as you would understand, from a workplace culture point of view, and their views are very important to us. And we're very grateful for the very courageous female officers and staff that have come forward since we have published the results and talked about them, to tell us a lot more about their experiences at work so that we can put action plans in place.
Two supplementaries, Bobby, just before you come in, and then let you come in. The first is from Colin McGrath and then from Mukesh Sharma. Colin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for the report. And I think none of us can question the determination that there is to try and address this issue across the organisation and then wider out into society as well. But I'm just wanting to maybe put it in the backdrop of, and we understand this, that you regularly tell us that you don't have the resources, that the money is short, that the budget doesn't meet the requirements that you have, which is for existing work. So I'm just wondering if you could give us some detail of some of the pressures that there would be to introduce new measures, or maybe to implement some of the recommendations that there are from the various reports, both in-house and within the community, if that's set against the backdrop of lack of funding. And I do recognise as well that this is a programme for government priority. It's a priority for the policing board and a priority for policing. So if we're all different elements of government are placing it as a priority, surely the resource has to follow that. So how will you manage that?
And just before you answer, Mukesh, you want to come in with your supplementary as well?
Thank you, Chair. Mine's more of an observation and a suggestion. Looking at conversations and the report from the police ombudsman, it is evident that there are victims who actually don't know they have been victims, but other members of the service have reported misbehaviour within the service. And we welcome that, because also I've noticed that there are more people reporting within the service than there are from outside. There's an issue, I think, in terms of the way the areas that are acceptable in behaviour are reported or understood by the wider public. So I think maybe some education internally, all the work is very, very commendable, and it's good, all the steps that are being taken. But actually a message to go out to the public to say, this is what is acceptable and these are the limits that are in place. And you mentioned the Power to Change Part 2 in May. That might be a place where that can be highlighted, so that we don't have victims who actually don't know that they have been victims. It's the behaviour prior to any sexual contact, that is also important so that people know that is unacceptable.
Thank you for the comments. If I go to Colin first. So Colin, this is a difficult one. To give you a few examples, Nick, Davey may want to come in, he may not, because Davey's going to be overseeing the challenges of delivering all this. But I pointed out to the Select Committee that in 2010, the budget for public services for Northern Ireland was £21 billion, of which we got 3.8%. Now it's £36 billion and we get 2.4% of that budget. And yet our policing mission, our demand has changed significantly. Ryan is dealing with Right Care, Right Person, which through a separate board meeting we will discuss. But we deal with so many calls for concern now around mental health issues, 1,000 ambulance calls a month. This all needs resourcing. We're doing mental health work, and the TV programme I've alluded to, you will all see that we're doing things that we're neither trained or resourced to do. In the legacy space, we have 167 people that we're not funded for every day working on legacy. It's not enough. We're in exchanges with the OMA inquiry at the moment around the speed with which we can provide material. Some of that is linked to a lack to capital funding, because we think we could and should have had investment around IT to help us avoid having to have people do the work, but allow software to do it for us, which is actually more reliable. But we are going to have 200 people in legacy, unfunded, dealing with things from an era before the PSNI was created. And those are officers and staff who should be dealing with these issues. They should be dealing with these issues. The College of Policing recommends that each major investigation team that deal with our murders against these young women should have 6 cases per team. We have 20. So I worry about that pressure. Offender management, this is my area of concern, and one that I spoke with Jess Phillips about yesterday. Orders that women obtain to manage the predatory and unacceptable behaviours of previous partners need to be enforced. Our offender management situation, and we've alluded to this in front of this board before, we should have one officer having 50 cases. That includes, that's VISA, that's violence and sexual offenders. We've got 1 to over 100. Now, we are doing everything we can to sweat our asset of resource. But because we have to do so many freedom of information requests, I won't get me started on some of the stuff, the nonsense that comes in here that freedom of information requests never created for, or the legacy resource that we have to invest in. It simply is a calculation that doesn't work. So we have to do prioritisation that Linda alluded to in her first question. And there's no criticism of the board, because I think the board operate incredibly judiciously and fairly towards the PSNI. You rightfully will criticise us in other areas. Whether it's because we haven't got enough people, we should have 950 neighbourhood officers, we've barely got over 400. These are the incredibly challenging statistics, killer statistics in many ways, that we have to somehow come to make those difficult decisions. So it is really challenging, and that's why I appreciate the question. And that's why, even with legacy, with the OMA and Finucane inquiry, and the way the new bill is structured, we probably have to put even more resources into legacy that I simply don't have, that I would say morally, and I think possibly legally, we should be provided with some sort of help with regards to central funding to assist us with that, which I know the board have really helped us in trying to make those arguments. To your point, Mukesh, I think a comms plan is what's required around a lot of this. What I will say is, and I've seen the cases that I've managed in special case hearings where some of the people involved have actually written to say that they're not a victim because they don't classify themselves as a victim with regards to some of these behaviours. So we've got to, and I think that's linked into Brendan, the chair's comments about misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the guidance around the behaviours between police officers and members of the public. So there's work to do. What I would say, under the stewardship of Davey and this report and the inclusion survey and the statement of intent that we did, there are a number of things coalescing that I think will, and some we need to do quickly, but will put us in a much different position moving forward. And I do want to underline and underscore, this is for such a small group of people, but that becomes the headline. Our people day and daily do incredible things. This is the exception, but they want us to do this. Nobody is more injured by these reports and by the circumstances of some of what we said today than our officers and staff, because of the pride they have in being part of this organisation. So I think there's something about having a more structured communications plan internally and externally around this. I don't know if Davey wanted to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Colin. I suppose just to remind the board that we initiated our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan in September 2022. So we're now 3 years on from that and into the 4th year. So I welcome Rachel Langdale's work. This is a really good opportunity to have that objective assessment to stop and pause and allow us to refocus where we go. And for me, it's very much about informing improvement and strengthening that operational delivery. I suppose the challenge for me is to take those recommendations and build and develop those into an action plan moving forward. And what I would say, Colin, is we won't hide behind resources and finances in terms of that. There's a lot of the recommendation that I think are really welcome from Rachel. And for me, they're about back to basics. It's about getting some of the fundamentals absolutely right in terms of investigative standards, that victim focus, the signposting support and information for victims. But also there are clearly challenges around some of the aspects of the recommendations that rely on other parts of that whole system approach that you talked about, around multi-agency working, about co-location, etc., that may well take significant input from others outside of policing, but we will certainly try to press for those. And there are other elements around work that's already underway, things like our cyber transformation plan that is key to unlocking some of the technology and some of the solutions around that. And some of this around training has already been outlined that do have clear resource implications. But we will certainly work ahead, and a lot of what is outlined in the report has already been commenced and was a work in progress when Rachel visited us, and we take that as an endorsement of some of the direction of travel. So it gives us a good opportunity to refocus, re-emphasise the need for some of this work and push ahead with a plan that I will bring to you as a board through the performance committee.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Deirdre Hargey on the perpetrators of violence against women and girls.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's more around the investigation of rape and sexual offending, and obviously Rachel Langdale had highlighted some of the concerns coming from England and Wales around the investigation officers and other staff who lack specialist knowledge in the field of rape and sexual offending, and also that there was a disproportionate effort in looking at testing the victim's credibility rather than looking at the alleged perpetrator. And I know this was something that was also raised in terms of Operation Roric, in terms of victim-centred approaches, and then also looking at investigative rigour. So I just have two, I suppose, areas around do the PSNI investigators and staff that are dealing with rape and sexual offences, do they have the appropriate specialist knowledge? And if so, if you can outline what that is. Do you look at the lived experience of victims in trying to amend that knowledge? And again, I would like to have some understanding of that in terms of the victim-centred approach. And are the PSNI putting an emphasis on the suspect rather than on the victim? And I suppose my further one was just when you're seeing reports in terms of all of the PSNI officers that were being investigated for the handling of the Katie Simpson case have retired. Do you think that that's damaging to the police's credibility in trying to deal with these issues and ensuring, you know, that there are robust investigations? So it's just in terms of some of your views on that. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Deirdre. If I start with the investigative element, if I may, and I will, of course, bring Davey in as not only overseeing these recommendations, but also as our head of crime. So our public protection branch, and in the Langdale report, and speaking to partners as I do, I think we need to recognise that we really do have the specialist capability that we need in the Police Service of Northern Ireland. These are officers who absolutely care, and I'll underscore the comments that were made publicly with regards to Natalie's family about that incredibly challenging investigation. You make a really valid point, and I think it's a historical concern that too often people look at the vulnerabilities of victims in a way that prevents us from dealing and focusing on the perpetrator. And if you even look at the abuse of position for sexual purposes report, it talks about vulnerabilities. There are 18 listed. I would suggest there are more than 18 that I personally consider to exist. But there was a mean number of around 6 that was the average of vulnerabilities of these victims. That's why these perpetrators focus on those victims. We need to make sure that we support those victims, we listen to those victims, and we protect those victims. And we need to make sure that we go after the people who are responsible for exploiting them and the perpetrators. So there is an absolute focus on that, I want to reassure you, and I'm sure it's only right that I bring Davey in on that. On the Katie Simpson case, which again was a case that was particularly noteworthy when I arrived because of the emerging understanding of what had happened. There are frustrating processes in place with regards to our misconduct requirements that I know, and I don't want to align this, I'll just be very clear to the Katie Simpson case. What I have seen since I've arrived, and it's something we're seeking to address to change the regulations, is that people have been able to leave the organisation when we should have been able to deal with them because of their breaching of the codes of practice in a way that made sure that their inappropriate behaviours were addressed and those people that they had impacted felt a sense of justice towards those individuals. And people are simply able to retire when that shouldn't happen. So we're looking to amend the regulations that currently restrict what we can do with regards to that. And often you will see reports that, and there may be some justification in some of them, particularly in the mainland, about X and Y officer being allowed to retire. That should never be the case. We should deal with these cases quickly so they're not earning an income when they don't deserve to earn an income, and robustly with regards to misconduct regulations. And that's something that we are seeking to address with the department, and I know we've had the support of the board with regards to that. I want to bring Davey in on the investigative issue, and I want to bring Bobby in on the misconduct issue. Is that okay, Davey?
Yeah, thanks, Gerry. I suppose just to try and reassure both you, the board, and indeed the community and the public at large, since we commenced the work on our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, we have now made over 6,000 arrests for many of the new offences in respect of domestic abuse, stalking, non-fatal strangulation. That works out at an average of 85 arrests every month for the domestic abuse offence, 20 arrests every month for stalking and harassment and threatening behaviour, and 77 arrests every month on average for non-fatal strangulation. So we are taking action against the perpetrators, and I just would want to emphasise that, but there's still there's still too many people suffering in silence, and I would encourage folk, if that is the case, to talk to us, or to talk to Women's Aid, and certainly we will work with those victims with empathy and professionalism to bring offenders to justice. That's why we created Public Protection Branch 10 years ago. They've just celebrated their 10th anniversary as such. That's why they're under the command of a dedicated Detective Chief Superintendent. And those officers have specialist detective status and accreditation for the work that they do, the very important work and very harrowing work that they do in Public Protection Branch. We have also increased our partnership working with other statutory agencies, health, justice, PPS, etc., in terms of how we address that serious sexual offending. We have recently just conducted a review, a peer review, and assistance from the Obsetoria team, which is the rape and serious sexual offences team in England and Wales. And again, that's about us again challenging ourselves, benchmarking, and making sure we have that absolutely perpetrator focused. There's still work to be done in that regard, and we will challenge that work, and we will continue to try and improve in terms of our performance in that regard. And we will work with our partners, Women's Aid, White Ribbon, ONUS, etc., all about ensuring that we have the victim's perspective at the forefront of our mind as we address those very issues. I think it's also probably useful maybe just to emphasise some of the progress we have made over the last number of years with our Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan. So in year one, we completed 23 of the 41 actions, and we started to see some of the performance improvements in respect of those arrest rates starting to increase, particularly around those new offences. There was further progress around year two, with 33 of the 41 actions completed. At the start of year three, we moved to a new framework, again, that aligned with the national strategy around protect, pursue, prevent and prepare. And there were another 13 new actions added to the plan to really, again, progress and challenge ourselves in terms of what we were doing. And as I say, that has brought us to the point of over 6,000 arrests. But there's still plenty of work to be done, Deirdre, absolutely. Outside of that, up encompass referrals, that's working with the Education Authority to identify young people that may have been impacted by domestic violence. We now have over 50,000 referrals through that scheme. And we're still working with the Education Authority in terms of technical issues to try and automate that at their end. I think there's still only about 20% of schools in Belfast have that automated referral system. So again, there's a resource implication around that. The Ask for Angela scheme is now active in over 400 outlets, again providing that opportunity for potential victims to raise concerns and so that we can address perpetrator behaviour. We have worked with in the region of 150 projects to design out crime. So again, making places safer for everyone. We have developed our work around Op Vigilant, which again is perpetrator focused. And we are now deploying teams specifically around that attention at events and in the nighttime economy around perpetrators, where they are, what they're doing, and that early intervention around perpetrators. And there has been training delivered right across all our gold, silver and bronze commanders around planning for public order, public safety events that ensure that violence against women and girls is part of the element of their considerations around the planning for those type of events. I think one of the most powerful elements that we have progressed has been the Power to Change campaign, which is that kind of active bystander, not only internally, but that's been taken up externally by many other organisations as well. But there's still lots to be done. And when we talk about prioritisation, for me, that is being prioritised around our recovery plan, particularly in Public Protection Branch, that we know we need to put people into that branch to ensure that we can continue to provide the level of service that is required, because that branch continues to be under strain, both in respect of the volume, the demand and the complexity of those investigations. And we continue to flex additional resource in there to help with things like offender management, etc., when that is required. So that for me, that's what that prioritisation means. But yeah, absolutely, there is a focus on perpetrators. There's more to be done. we're not getting it perfect all the time. Absolutely not. I would not be naive enough to try and suggest that, but certainly I think hopefully that gives you a bit of assurance in the direction of travel. And I don't, Bobby, if you want to pick up on the Roric stuff.
I was going to suggest, just because of what we're trying to do with regulations, if we write to Deirdre around that, is that okay? Just because of time, I'm conscious, Chair.
Thank you. Final question in relation to violence against women and girls is from Nuala McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question that dates back to the Katie Simpson murder investigation. It's a case that I have consistently raised at the board. Katie was murdered in 2020, so it'll be 6 years ago this August. And following the OPONI report, we were told on numerous occasions that changes had been made. Yet through a Freedom of Information request, they assume nothing, believe nobody investigative mindset called ABC for short. It was said that it was added, that protocol was added to the death investigation manual in this one on the 22nd of July 2025. But we had been told that everything had been implemented, all of the recommendations from the Katie Simpson OPONI report had been implemented. I think that's a very core element of that. Yes, they might not have used those words, but actually if you're talking 5 years, I think that's a big delay. But also it brings me on to the murder of Natalie McNally, and I want to pay tribute to her family, particularly her mum and dad, especially their interviews that they did following the conviction of her murderer. I think it was very brave of them, what they said, but the unsuspecting, if that's the correct word, of her murderer in the early days following her death allowed him access to her family and to her as well. And that trauma that they spoke about in their interview, they said they will find hard to get over that. And I have tabled written questions around that, but why, given we had already had a murder 3 years previously, and we were told at the board that changes were implemented, was this man unsuspected in the early days? Was his alibi actually investigated forensically? Or did we have an approach that was believe the male? Because it has raised serious concerns within the public about the immediate aftermath of women's murders. And I want to ask if there will be any more cases like Katie, or perhaps like Natalie, where those initial few days the grave mistakes were made and further victims have been traumatized.
So thanks for the question, Nuala. And I understand the sensitivities. On the Katie Simpson case and those concerns you've got, I think I need to look at that, if that's okay. I will bring Dave in, but I think I need to look at that slower time. I'm happy to write to you and bring you in to talk about that, because I don't recognise that. But we'll check that. On the issues around Natalie, and I keep saying, whenever I think we've done a really good job, there's some negativity in the media, which is often related to freedom of information requests and all sorts of strange things. And I think people who just have a negative view of policing. But let me try and be clear. And as somebody who's got more time as a detective than anybody in this room, how incredibly difficult it is at the start of these awful incidents to understand what's happened, particularly when you are dealing with people who are profoundly devious and particularly cunning and conniving in their planning to perpetrate some of these crimes. We might not get things right straight away, but we have shown that we do get things right. In this particular case, and I know Natalie's family are aware of this, there was a media story that an officer who was in charge of the inquiry had not properly undertaken the checks required with regards to the man responsible for her murder, who I don't wish to name, for his alibi. Those checks were done, and telephone liaison unit checks were done. And the individual was actually declassified as a suspect by a detective chief inspector who made the decision and has the complete trust of the family based on all the information that was available to him. But it was because of the diligence, the exceptional care and professionalism, and checking every single aspect of that alibi, that through more detailed forensic work, we were able to establish that the alibi of this live streaming was entirely fraudulent. And even the initial inquiries, I have to tell you, with CCTV and other checks that were undertaken that I won't go into publicly, the alibi seemed to stand up. So I really want to again repeat my admiration for the officers who did the work that they did to ultimately achieve the arrest and prosecution of that individual for what he did. I think it may be the first case I'm aware of where somebody has gone to such lengths using all sorts of methods around software to try and create a false alibi in advance of their intentions to commit such a vile murder. So as much as there is a undercurrent of reporting against the police, this is a case that I don't think they could have done any more in the time they had. And were actually, in recognition to the family, and I'm so grateful for their response to the prosecution team, counsel at court, and to their recognition of the officers, it was actually some outstanding detective work that got us over the line. Your last question around, will we face more of these? One thing is certain about being a detective, it's all uncertain. So there will be other cases in the future that I'm sure in the media will be twisted against our officers to suggest they've done things that they shouldn't have done. I even saw a story turning the attack into Lurgan Police Station into a failing by the PSNI in a paper. Absolutely no failing. Absolutely no failing at all. Even to suggest that is abhorrent. No failing. And I'm happy to deal with that publicly in the fullness of time. So the accountability I really welcome, because I think you know my views about transparency and openness, but it has to be fair and it has to be reasoned and it has to be justified. That, by the way, doesn't criticise you, Nuala, because I think you're right to ask that question, because it's given me an opportunity to talk about it as well, because it's been in the public domain. It's more about the public reporting that I just want to be a bit more reasoned and some checks and balances to go in place, including speaking to us, I think, with those people who put the stories out there, because it can be incredibly misleading and it affects trust and confidence in the organisation. But it'd be remiss of me if I didn't bring Davey in, who...
Sorry, I'm going to stop. We're really running out of time. So we can continue this conversation in the private session, but we want to now move on to matters of general policing. And just in relation, given where we are on the clock, if we could just have one answer. So Chief Constable, you decide whether that's yourself or a member of your senior team, okay, just so that we can get through the questions reasonably quickly. And the first one kind of bridges us from violence against women and girls and into general policing, and that's from Frank McManus. Where's Frank? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just you have answered quite a bit of the question I was going to ask about the numbers all associated with wrongdoings. I was very interested in all the different types of categories, and I was more about the wrongful advantage that was taken, not just of sexual processes or for sexual purposes. And if I could ask you to tabulate those numbers that you shared with us this morning, because there was quite a lot in that, and if you could add in as well, convictions, were the convictions a slap on the wrist or were the custodial sentences as well. But I'm really interested in you just talk about that the special case hearings. Is it only yourself, Chief Constable, that can chair these, or can a member of the SET, if I want to call them that, chair and dismiss an officer who has done wrong?
So Frank, and for the efficiency of time, Chair, we'll write to you on this. The details I gave you this morning, since 2021, through special case hearings, which are the most serious, have to be chaired by the Chief Constable. We've dismissed 42 people since 2021 for a myriad of issues, and we'll send you the details. I think through ordinary case hearings, which are chaired by Assistant Chief Constables, I think we dismissed a further 14, but I want to clarify that and we'll send you the details. Court processes, because of the time of the criminal justice system, we can give you some information, but that is something that we're often trying to catch up with. But I'll send you a written response with regards to the information around convictions as well. Okay.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Next question is from Trevor Clarke in relation to the attack on Lurgan Station.
I think, to be fair, Chair, given the brevity of time, it's been well covered with Chief Constable, and I agree with his remarks around the propaganda stunt that it was. And obviously, we stand in solidarity with all of the officers and the families involved. But so, can I take my second question instead, if that's okay? My second question, Chief Constable, was on holiday pay. Given the officers have a grave concern about the length of time this has been going on, and there's a feeling within the service, and I know obviously confidence in the service sometimes can ebb and flow. But I mean, I would more and more officers suggesting that you are trying to run out the clock and you are trying to do everything. And I'm using this opportunity, obviously, for you to address that, Chief Constable. But I'm not accusing you of that. But there is a concern, given the length of time and the defensive nature of the police, that there is a concern that you are running out the clock to try and prevent these claims being awarded.
I'll bring Mark in, but just for clarity, and I made it clear to the board previously, as with the data breach, I've been very clear to work very diligently to settle these cases as quickly, because that's as efficiently as we can. So I want to reassure you, we're not ringing any clock out. I've made it very clear since the moment I got here that we need to resolve this. There has been some developments in the assessments, and I think that might be some information that's got to people that's caused them a concern. But if I bring Mark in just to address that quickly, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Chief Constable. It's a question which is often raised at the Team PSNI events, and very real to a large cadre of officers and staff. But in terms of the overall settlement of the holiday pay claims, we have a business case currently back with the department. So we've been working really hard to try to get an agreed, approved business case in which we can move forward. Just recently, actually in March, there were some payments in relation to holiday pay to deal with the here and now from a point forward basis. But the big issue really is in relation to approval of a business case that means that we can move forward with the tribunal in the implementation of settlements. But associated with that, of course, is the funding. And we're doing all we can to lobby both for an approved settlement and also for the funding to enable us to implement it. So I think, as the Chief's outlined, it's a priority for us. There's no trilling of feet or being difficult around the preparation of the business case. We're absolutely on board for settling this for members of our officers and staff.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is from Gerry Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. And could I just start off by adding my own contribution to what happened at the Lurgan Police Station as the spokesperson for Sinn Féin. And how stupid it was, achieving nothing. My question, just to put this in context, Chief Constable, is around, and it's in the context of genocide and in Palestine, which is something like 75,000 Palestinians killed now, and also the fact that recently, I think in the last 2 days, there's some law being brought in by the Knesset in Israel, which is saying that they will bring back hanging, and some of them actually wore nooses on their lapel for Palestinians who kill Israelis, but not for Israelis who kill Palestinians. So it's that type of, and it's gone off because there's so much happening in the world. But I sent the question to you about 2 weeks ago, and I got 2 answers. 1 week, a couple of days later, another one off that. So the question, to try and keep this short, is there's a worry out there, and it comes from an article which was in the Irish News, so I say that. That's where the information is coming from. But it is very worrying that there was, we know that there was spyware used, including Cellbrite. And there was also, there's spyware out there called Novi Spy and Cosian. And in terms of Cellbrite, there was a neither confirm nor deny approach taken to the naming of the and the organisations involved when the police were asked a year ago, I think it was. It's to ask for assurance that because these are some of these, and especially the Conceal Nova spy, I understand, can be used to infiltrate into phones and take out information, which is not without the owner knowing. Sometimes it's used in stations, but it's used outside that. So people are worried now because of obviously the history that we went through a while back over surveillance, that there is no contract or linkage to Israeli companies that would allow that with the PSNI, because it's the reputation of the PSNI I'm worried about in terms of this. At this time, won't be used in the future because they were unlawful use, and this spyware is not covered by, as far as I know, legislation in Britain. Thank you.
So I'll try and cover this, Gerry, in a way that reassures you. I think as a result of freedom of information requests, which are industrial to the PSNI and are abused, which takes up resources that should be dealing with far more important stuff, there's been board questions and media queries that present a public perception that we've got I think a £5.5 million contract with, and I think you've mentioned Cellbrite previously. That is not correct. We do have a contract with a firm that provides, and the firm is Source Tactical Gear Limited, and that contract began in 2019, which is for the supply of integrated body armour systems, body armour. That contract is for £5.5 million over 8 years, based on a 5-year initial period with an option for a 2-year extension, followed by a final 1-year extension. So any suggestion in any media that we're investing vast sums of money in some sort of illicit and complex spying material with regards to that amount of money would be inaccurate. We do not have a direct contract with Cellbrite, but we use software under license that is theirs because there's procurement rules that allow us to do that. And that material, because it helps us understand what threats exist against children and vulnerable people when examining phones, is all done under proper authorization. It's not done in any illicit way, as people may have alluded to. This links into the McCulloch report around proper legal advice around all things we do around covert authorities or surveillance activity. And we are using products to extract information which will protect people from harms that you would expect us to do with regards to people's use of devices, but only when properly authorised to do so. In the same fashion as colleagues in other law enforcement agencies elsewhere. What I won't do is allow us to be in a position where we haven't got the technical applications that we need to gather evidence off devices to prosecute people, to keep people safe. But we do all of that, particularly here, Gerry, because of the nature of policing here and very much the human rights and community-based approach with significant safeguards wrapped around it. And any procurement that we undertake is through regularised procurement contracts that are accredited. I don't know if Mark or anybody else wants to come in on that. And I'm happy to talk to you about that off table to explain any more detail that you might want.
Okay, thank you. First of all,
by the way, no, we don't, sorry, Gerry, to cut across you. We don't use Cassane. I asked that question. I don't know if previously we used it, Gerry, but we don't have any use of Cassane currently. I don't know the history of that.
okay, thank you, Chief Constable. Actually, one of the answers that I did get back was around the body armour, which is not, I don't think anybody have an issue. It's for protection of people. The worry is, and it was in these articles, that there were other spyware which could be used. And it is not so long ago, which is why I think it's still relevant. And I think over the weekend, those two journalists, Dorry Mackin and Peter Corrigan, who were also saying that some stuff was used unlawfully. I don't even know when that was for, but it certainly just came out recently. But thank you for the answer, and we can't talk about it.
And that what you've just alluded to is historical material that was highlighted through McCulloch. I've spoken to those lawyers, explained the position, and they've gone, or that the McCulloch report has now gone to other legal bodies who I think are engaging with the British government around it. But it's stuff that we've dealt with through McCulloch and the lessons learned.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Alan Chambers, and it's on antisocial behaviour. Alan.
Chief Constable, what actions the PSNI has taken to address the recent upsurge in antisocial behaviour, mainly targeted businesses around Bangor city centre and being carried out by groups of young people? And if he is satisfied that there has been sufficient police visibility to deter this behaviour, and could he also give the board an update in the investigations of the recent assault on a gentleman walking his dog in Bangor city centre? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Alan, because interestingly, I think it smacks of some of the stuff that you'll all see in the media today around what's known as steaming, which has happened in recent days in London and the West Midlands, particularly Birmingham, around groups of young people causing disorder. If I go with the latter element of your question first, Alan, and by the way, I welcome your question. In relation to the assault that has been reported in the media, and particularly on social media, I actually know the victim and I have spoken to him. He was intervening when some young people were basically abusing a couple and have been causing previous antisocial behaviour, as a result of which he and a friend and his dog Max were attacked. I have to be careful what I say, but because of ongoing proceedings, but 4 persons were identified and charged with offences relating to actual bodily harm, affray, and causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. I'm also informed by Ryan that 2 further people have been arrested, I think today. And post-charge bail conditions prevent those individuals from going into Bangor. Again, I'll talk to you after this meeting. We understand the root causes for that disorder now, and those have been addressed. And it's subsequently been peaceful in Bangor, but I'm conscious of the upset that this will have caused to local residents. And Ryan has made sure that there's been extra visibility in Bangor to make sure that people are reassured that Bangor is the safe place that it should be. This was an abhorrent and unnecessary assault. I have to say the victim and Max are now doing well, but it's the like of which we don't want to see in the streets of Northern Ireland. I don't know if Ryan needs to add anything. No.
Well, Chief Constable, certainly I can report the community is particularly grateful and reassured by the prompt arrests that your officers made. Does the young ages of those offending present any particular challenges to your officers?
I am going to hand over to Ryan for that because I saw him reach forward, which I'm grateful for.
Thanks, Alan. And just want to echo the Chief's comments about how disgusting the attack was, and just to reassure you, my team in local policing take it incredibly seriously and are working, I think, really closely to the Chamber. Have been really good down there in Bangor and have been really outspoken and working with us on us, which has been great. I mean, their ages are the ages, and again, we're in a public session and we'll talk too much specific. I'll talk generally, and there's a really well tried, trusted approach to dealing with offending in young people that is accredited, done in partnership with the prosecution, the courts, ourselves, and youth justice. That will take its course, and it doesn't cause us any unnecessary barriers in relation to how this might be taken forward.
Okay, thank you. And our final question is from Keith Buchanan.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, you mentioned in your opening remarks regarding the kids' court, etc., outside schools, an issue of speeding, etc. And we've talked several hours on straight to do on violence against women and girls, and unfortunately numbers or statistics on their people's lives. But there's 20 families from the start of this year to the end of March. That's 20 families in 3 months. Is education, prevention, and enforcement working? Number one. Do you need to change tact? And if you were to give me an estimate of what effort you put into those 3 categories, education, prevention, and enforcement, is it a third, a third, a third? And should that change? Because it's not working. We're seeing obviously years up and down. It's a big spike this year. But is there enough effort going in on those 3 categories, and what should we need to change as a police service and us as a board and society?
So thank you for the question, Keith. I'm going to hand over to Mel, who's done a huge amount of work in this area. Many of those deaths, though, from my knowledge of those incidents, are and were preventable. They're lives that should not have been lost. But can I hand over to Mel, please?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Thank you, Chief. We have definitely seen an increase this year, this calendar year to date, with the 20 fatalities. And we continue to be absolutely confident that we're focusing on the right areas. Most of these are preventable. Most of them have one or multiple of those fatal 5. That's speeding, drink and drugs, inattention or careless driving, use of mobile phones and seat belts. In terms of the trends that we're seeing, definitely rural roads continue to be prevalent. So about 48% of fatal and serious road traffic collisions occur on rural roads. And we have seen an emerging trend around pedestrians. So 4 of those fatalities this year have been pedestrians. Actually, sorry, 6 of those have been pedestrians. And out of those 6, younger people aged under 16, we had 2. And older people aged over 65, we had 2. So both ends of the age spectrum are disproportionately representative in those pedestrian deaths. You're quite right to say that enforcement is not the only answer. Although our enforcement is up, so our roads policing, the vans, have done 82,000 speed enforcements in the first 11 months of 2025. And we continue also with roads policing, complementing that with enforcing around road traffic offences that they detect. I would like to update the board that we've now replaced 13 of those vacant posts into roads policing, which was an undertaking that I made at a previous board to try and put more investment back into visible road policing on the roads. The Road Safety Partnership are working really closely with us now, and I'm delighted that they're now taking forward our recommendations around increasing the fines that go with speeding tickets. The introduction of the graduated driving licence scheme, I think, will help with those younger and newer drivers on the roads. And we'll continue to develop the Lifesaver approach with the rollout of Community Lifesaver that will complement what we've seen in Derry City Strabane with the youth courts. So our aim is to have local communities doing local speed enforcement operations, which I absolutely know from my previous experience will completely rebut the assumption that it's not people from our communities who speed on our roads. It is absolutely people from local communities who speed on the roads around their own area. And I hear people saying things like, oh, I'm not going very fast, so I don't need to wear my seatbelt, which is an absolute nonsense. So I do think that we are getting the balance right around prevention and education and enforcement, but we need to do more, and we need to do as much as we can to change those social behaviours on the roads. One area that I'm particularly interested in is the concept of the designated driver, because it's not just the person who doesn't have a drink for the night, it's the person who's responsible for everybody else in the car that they are driving. So making sure that everybody's wearing a seatbelt, making sure they are driving responsibly and lawfully and in accordance with the road conditions, and making sure that they're not distracted by anybody else in the car. So that's going to be another area of focus for our teams, that designated driver. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. And thank you, Chief Constable, to you and your team for those answers to our questions today. As a board, we look forward to receiving ACC BEC's action plan in response to the reports on VOG and misogyny that we've discussed today. It is an issue that we will keep on this agenda, and I know your determination, Chief Constable, and that of the senior team in leading that change. Thanks to those who have joined us online and also those here in James House. That concludes today's session, and our next scheduled board meeting is